In the final winter of the Second World War, the Rhine River stood as Nazi Germany's last natural barrier between the crumbling Reich and the relentless advance of Allied forces. It was March 1945. American, British, and Canadian divisions had fought their way across the Ardennes, through shattered towns and frozen fields, now converging on the Rhine's western banks. Yet while the eyes of the world were fixed on the massive armies preparing to cross, a smaller, invisible war was taking place, one waged in silence and secrecy. At its center was a handful of men from the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, the forerunner to the CIA, whose mission would vanish into the fog of history. Operation Silent Fox was conceived within the quiet walls of a commandeered chateau near Luxembourg City. Intelligence briefings described it as a preparatory infiltration, designed to assist the U.S. Ninth Army's planned Rhine crossings north of Remagen. The OSS team, 8 men drawn from the organization's most specialized detachment, had trained for months in sabotage, code work, and irregular warfare. They were veterans of previous covert actions in occupied France and Belgium. Their orders were clear: cross the Rhine ahead of the main Allied thrust, disrupt German communications, and map unguarded crossing routes for advancing divisions. The man chosen to lead the mission was Captain Thomas Keenan, a 31-year-old officer from the 82nd Airborne who had been reassigned to OSS after D-Day. His team included linguists, demolitions experts, and a single radio operator, Sergeant Leon Martel, known for his ability to transmit coded messages under enemy jamming. They carried silenced M3 grease guns, explosives disguised as coal lumps, and false identity papers marking them as German engineers from the Reich's Pioneer Corps. The plan depended on precision and timing, and on luck that would not hold for long. On the evening of March 6, 1945, the men gathered near the banks of the Rhine outside Remagen. The weather was cold, the river swollen with melted snow from the Siebengebirge hills. According to declassified mission briefings, their insertion point was several kilometers upstream, near the village of Erpel, just opposite the Ludendorff Bridge, a steel railway span still held by the Wehrmacht. Unbeknownst to them, American forces under the 9th Armored Division were simultaneously moving toward the same objective. A field log later recovered from the OSS archives noted that at 21:30 hours, the team launched 3 small collapsible kayaks under cover of darkness. Each man paddled silently, their eyes fixed on the faint silhouette of the eastern bank. The Rhine's current was treacherous, filled with debris and shattered bridges from months of Allied bombings. Still, they crossed undetected. At 23:15, Martel sent a brief transmission back to base: crossing complete. Proceeding to target grid K-12. It would be the last confirmed message ever received from Operation Silent Fox. The next morning, thunder rolled across the Rhine, not from the weather, but from artillery. The U.S. 9th Armored Division had captured the Ludendorff Bridge intact, shocking both German command and the Allies themselves. The crossing point became the first Allied bridgehead east of the Rhine, and chaos erupted along the river. In the confusion of the breakthrough, Keenan's team was forgotten for nearly 48 hours. When OSS headquarters attempted to re-establish contact, there was only static. By March 9, Allied engineers had begun reinforcing the captured bridge, while waves of infantry poured across. But questions soon surfaced about the missing team. Patrols sent to locate them on the western bank found no trace, no boats, no camp, no abandoned gear. Locals interviewed after the war recalled hearing muffled gunfire and seeing distant flares that night along the river's bend, though none could say who fired first. Captain Keenan's unit was officially listed as missing behind enemy lines. The OSS report filed days later described the operation as unaccounted for under heavy field movement. But unofficially, whispers spread through intelligence circles. Some believed the team had been captured by German river patrols. Others suspected betrayal, that their mission's details had been leaked by a compromised informant inside the OSS European network. In a private memorandum dated March 12, an unnamed analyst wrote, "Silent Fox presumed neutralized. Circumstances unknown. Recommend containment of details until verification." The order to suppress the mission's records would keep it buried for decades. The Rhine crossing marked the beginning of Germany's final collapse. Yet amidst the triumph, a quiet mystery lingered in the shadow of victory. a small band of men who had slipped ahead of history, only to vanish without a trace. As the Allied push continued eastward, the story of Operation Silent Fox faded into rumor, its unanswered questions drowned beneath the roar of advancing armies. But one fact remained undeniable. At 23:15 hours on March 6, 1945, 8 men crossed the Rhine. And from that moment on, no one ever heard from them again. The Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen was never meant to be a turning point of the war. Built during the First World War to carry trains and supplies across the Rhine, it had withstood years of bombing and sabotage. Yet, in early March 1945, fate and timing converged there in one of the most dramatic moments of the Allied campaign. As American troops stormed the western approaches, the bridge still stood, an unthinkable gift to the advancing 9th Armored Division. But amid that chaos, far from the cheers of soldiers crossing the Rhine for the first time, a darker mystery unfolded in the shadows: the silent disappearance of an OSS team that was supposed to be operating just north of that very crossing. By March 7, 1945, as General William Hogue's men of Combat Command B reached the bridge, reports from the 9th Army's Intelligence Section noted a complete communications blackout from Operation Silent Fox. The OSS had expected a second transmission confirming sabotage of a German field line network between Erpel and Linz am Rhein, but none came. Instead, all contact ceased. The last message, sent 2 nights earlier, was a brief cipher acknowledging successful crossing. Beyond that, silence. On the ground, the speed of events overtook every plan. The unexpected capture of the Ludendorff Bridge forced the Allies to reroute entire divisions to exploit the crossing. Engineers rushed to stabilize the structure under relentless artillery and Luftwaffe attack. Amid this chaos, requests to search for the missing OSS team were delayed. To frontline commanders, the disappearance of 8 men seemed insignificant beside the logistical miracle of holding the bridge. Yet to the OSS detachment based near Bonn, it was an alarming enigma. The men had been trained to survive under any condition. Complete disappearance suggested something deliberate: capture, compromise, or worse. Eyewitnesses later offered conflicting accounts. One engineer from the 276th Combat Engineer Battalion recalled encountering 2 men in German uniforms, speaking accented German, near the Erpel railway tunnel the morning after the bridge's capture. They carried forged Wehrmacht passes and vanished before they could be questioned. Another local villager, Frau Erika Vollmer, recounted seeing what she described as a small group of Americans, tied and blindfolded, being loaded into a civilian truck by German soldiers retreating eastward along the Linz Road. Allied censors dismissed her story as rumor, but it would re-emerge decades later in declassified intelligence files. Within OSS headquarters in Paris, analysts began combing through intercepted German signals. One decrypted message from Army Group B mentioned foreign saboteurs apprehended crossing the Rhine, special handling ordered by SD liaison. The Sicherheitsdienst, or SD, the intelligence branch of the SS, was infamous for its brutal treatment of captured agents. Yet the message provided no names, no dates, only fragments. It was never clear if the reference pertained to the Silent Fox team. As the days passed, the Rhine crossing expanded. Elements of the 9th Infantry Division and 99th Infantry were establishing positions deep inside the East Bank, while General Eisenhower hailed the event as a decisive breach in Hitler's defense line. But within the OSS, unease deepened. Captain Keenan's group had been sent with precise coordinates. Their disappearance in such proximity to the Remagen bridgehead suggested either catastrophic bad luck or a betrayal of their mission's secrecy. Declassified memos from 1948 reveal that an OSS officer, Lieutenant Robert Hale, later identified as the mission's intelligence liaison, had raised concerns before the launch. In a briefing transcript, he warned, "The source providing the crossing intelligence has not been verified. Proceeding under his data could compromise insertion points." His warning was overruled. The informant, a supposed German engineer named Klaus Ritter, claimed knowledge of minefield gaps and patrol schedules. Post-war records showed Ritter had ties to the SD's Counterintelligence Bureau, AMT-6. Whether he intentionally led the team into a trap remains an open question. The military narrative, meanwhile, focused on the heroics of the 9th Armored Division and the bridge's miraculous survival under fire. For the OSS, the story was buried beneath official silence. By the time Allied High Command authorized a field search north of Remagen, the front had moved over 40 kilometers eastward. Patrols scoured the riverbanks, finding only fragments: an empty American flare gun, a torn parachute cord, a broken radio casing marked with OSS issue code. Still, one haunting clue surfaced in an after-action report from the 60th Infantry Regiment. In the ruins of a farmhouse near Kasbach, soldiers discovered a blood-stained map annotated in English. One of the circled areas matched the exact coordinates of the Silent Fox drop zone. Next to it, in hurried pencil, someone had scrawled, "No way back." What happened in those critical hours between the Rhine crossing and the Allied bridgehead remains one of the unsolved shadows of the campaign. Were the OSS men captured during their infiltration, mistaken for enemy agents by their own side, or executed in secret by German forces retreating to the east? Each theory leaves traces but no resolution. As Remagen became a symbol of victory, the names of the missing operatives faded from official records, listed simply as MIA, presumed dead. But among the surviving OSS officers, the incident became a quiet obsession, a question that refused to die even as the war came to its end. The Rhine had been crossed. The war was nearing its final chapter. Yet somewhere between the triumph of Remagen and the advancing Allied front, 8 men had vanished without a word. The river that carried armies forward had swallowed their story whole, and for those who sought answers, it was only the beginning. By late March 1945, the Rhine crossings had become the great turning point of the war in Western Europe. The Allies were advancing deep into Germany, the Wehrmacht retreating in disarray. Yet, even amid the triumph and chaos, the mysterious disappearance of Operation Silent Fox was quietly investigated behind closed doors by the Office of Strategic Services. What had begun as a covert infiltration across the Rhine was now a full-scale intelligence puzzle, a mission swallowed by confusion, conflicting witness reports, and missing records. At OSS Field Headquarters near Bonn, Lieutenant Robert Hale was handed the unenviable task of reconstructing the team's movements. The unit's last coded message, "Crossing complete," proceeding to target grid K, 12-inch, had been sent at 23:15 on March 6. Hale, who had helped prepare the operation, knew that K-12 referred to a narrow corridor north of Erpel, a wooded slope above the east bank of the Rhine. By all logic, the men should have moved inland from there, avoiding populated areas. But none of the patrols sent afterward found signs of passage. No footprints, no camps, no discarded equipment. Military intelligence reports added to the confusion. The 9th Army's G2 section received accounts from local civilians of foreign soldiers in German uniforms being taken by SS troops near Linz am Rhein. But these reports were vague, collected amid the chaos of retreating German units and advancing Allied lines. Worse, a second document, an intercepted German transmission dated March 8, spoke of special prisoners captured in the Rhine corridor, now in custody of the Sicherheitsdienst, SD. No names. No details. But the timing matched too perfectly to ignore. In a debriefing recorded years later, one OSS analyst remarked, "We believed they were alive for at least 48 hours after crossing. After that, nothing. No radio, no witnesses, just silence." The SD had a reputation for ruthlessness when dealing with captured Allied agents. Since 1943, under Himmler's Kommandobefehl, commando order, all enemy commandos and saboteurs caught behind German lines were to be executed without trial. For intelligence officers, this meant that if the Silent Fox team had indeed fallen into SD hands, survival was nearly impossible. Still, the lack of any trace, no bodies, no grave reports, no captured documents, suggested an operation handled under extreme secrecy. OSS counterintelligence began probing whether the mission's location had been compromised before launch. Records revealed that their supposed local guide, Klaus Ritter, the German engineer who provided the infiltration routes, had not been seen since the night of the operation. Post-war interrogations later confirmed Ritter's collaboration with the SD's AMT-6, the same unit responsible for counter-espionage operations across the Rhineland. His information had been crucial in planning the team's crossing point. If he had been a double agent, it meant Silent Fox was doomed before it even began. Hale pushed the investigation further. He obtained copies of German field orders recovered from the area after the Allied advance. One, issued by SS Obersturmbannführer Walter Schellenberg, referenced an unidentified enemy reconnaissance unit detained by local command, transfer pending. The date, March 7, 1945, the same night the Ludendorff Bridge fell. Hale cross-referenced this with the fragmentary OSS intercepts, building a chilling hypothesis. The team may have been captured, interrogated, and moved east before the Allies could close in. But the trail soon went cold. When the 1st Infantry Division liberated Linz am Rhine on March 24, no prisoners matching the OSS agents' descriptions were found. Local SD offices had been evacuated. Files were burned. Witnesses were scarce. One German civilian, a railway worker named Jacob Fechter, later testified to seeing a group of men in torn uniforms, hands bound, escorted toward a freight car on the Linz siding. He recalled hearing American accents among them. The train departed eastward just before dawn. Despite these leads, higher command had little appetite for a public inquiry. With the war entering its final phase, the disappearance of 8 agents was not considered strategically significant. The OSS officially classified the operation as lost personnel, presumed deceased. Yet internally, the case was never fully closed. Hale kept his notes, quietly building a dossier he labeled Rhine File 37C, containing reports, maps, and transcripts, all marked restricted. By April, when U.S. forces swept through the Ruhr and captured thousands of German soldiers, Hale questioned several high-ranking SS officers. None admitted knowledge of captured Allied agents from the Rhine area. One, however, an SD major named Heinrich Loh, claimed that a small Anglo-American sabotage unit had been detained by order of the Reich Security Main Office, RSHA, and moved under Operation Führerfeder. That codename had never appeared in Allied records. Its purpose remains unknown to this day. As the months passed and Europe turned toward liberation, the story of the vanished OSS team began to fade into the background of victory. Yet for those who had known the men, Captain Keenan, Sergeant Martel, and the others, the silence was unbearable. They had vanished at the very moment of triumph, leaving behind nothing but questions. In 1946, an internal OSS summary concluded with a single, haunting line: circumstances surrounding the loss of Operation Silent Fox remain unverified. No physical evidence of personnel recovered. Possibility of unauthorized transfer cannot be excluded. The Rhine, once a symbol of breakthrough, had become a grave of secrets. Somewhere between the villages of Erpel and Linz, amid the wreckage of bridges and forests torn by shellfire, the fate of the 8 men had been sealed. And yet, without bodies or records, they could not even be mourned, only speculated about, their story lingering like an unfinished sentence in the chronicles of the war. As one intelligence officer later reflected, they crossed the river to open a path for victory, but disappeared into history instead. The OSS would soon turn its attention to post-war Europe and the gathering tensions of a new kind of conflict. But for Robert Hale, the unanswered questions of the Rhine would remain his unfinished mission, a riddle without resolution, buried beneath the ruins of a collapsing Reich. The first warm days of spring settled over the Rhine Valley in April 1945. Germany's defenses were collapsing, cities were falling in rapid succession, and Allied forces surged eastward. Yet among the countless reports of liberation and surrender, a short intelligence memorandum surfaced from the OSS detachment in Koblenz, one that reignited the mystery of the missing Operation Silent Fox. It described the discovery of American-manufactured field gear, OSS type, recovered from wooded terrain northeast of Linz am Rhine. For investigators who had nearly given up hope, it was the first tangible trace in weeks. The site lay within a dense forest near the small hamlet of Dattenberg, roughly 6 kilometers north of Linz. The recovery unit, part of the U.S. 97th Infantry Division, had stumbled upon the find while clearing scattered German resistance pockets. Among the debris, they identified torn canvas packs bearing serial numbers tied to the OSS European Division. A damaged field radio was found, its crystal smashed, the wiring ripped out deliberately, as though destroyed to prevent interception. Nearby, in the mud, lay a U.S. .45 caliber M1911 pistol, its slide locked open, one round still chambered. No bodies. No bloodstains. Just silence. Investigators concluded that the equipment had been there for several weeks, possibly since the first week of March. The surrounding terrain showed signs of brief occupation, burned paper remnants, fragments of ration tins, and the imprint of collapsed shelter halves. The pattern suggested a short-term bivouac. Someone had camped there, and then vanished. The coordinates matched a zone the Silent Fox team was believed to have passed through after crossing the Rhine. For Lieutenant Robert Hale, who was still tracing every lead, the evidence was chilling confirmation that the men had survived at least a few days beyond their last transmission. What had driven them north, away from their assigned objective near Erpel, puzzled everyone. Their orders had been to move east, toward German signal relay posts and rail junctions vital to the Wehrmacht's Rhine defenses. Yet the site at Dattenberg suggested a complete deviation, almost as if they were avoiding someone, or something. Hale's notes, declassified decades later, revealed his growing suspicion of betrayal. He had uncovered irregularities in the pre-mission communication logs. The infiltration map provided to Keenan's team differed subtly from the version filed in OSS headquarters. A red-marked route that should have passed through cleared terrain instead led directly toward a German patrol corridor maintained by the 11th Panzer Division's rearguard. It was a setup. The informant who'd provided the coordinates, Klaus Ritter, was now confirmed missing, presumed escaped east with retreating SS personnel. Hale wrote, if Ritter was indeed SD, Silent Fox walked into a net woven specifically for them. Meanwhile, German records recovered near Koblenz contained hints that reinforced this theory. Among them, a partially burned SD field log noted, special prisoners, 8 men in enemy uniform, captured in civilian zone near Dattenberg. Interrogation ordered by AMT-6, transfer imminent. The handwriting was consistent with that of an SD officer operating out of Linz. But no follow-up report, transfer notice, or execution record was ever found. The trail ended as abruptly as it began. American counterintelligence teams interviewed local residents in the following days. An elderly farmer, Heinrich Dahl, claimed that in mid-March he had seen uniformed Germans escorting foreign soldiers with their hands bound along the forest road. Another villager remembered hearing shots echoing in the hills shortly afterward. Yet when troops scoured the woods, they found no graves, no remains, and no shell casings. The ground had been disturbed in places, but heavy spring rains had washed away any clear evidence. Whatever had happened there had been done quickly and thoroughly erased. By May 1945, Germany had surrendered. Europe rejoiced in liberation, but the men of Operation Silent Fox remained missing, their file marked, closed, presumed fatal. Hale refused to let it rest. He appealed to Colonel William Donovan, the OSS director, for permission to continue the inquiry under post-war intelligence operations. Donovan approved, quietly remarking, every operation leaves a footprint. Find theirs. That summer, Hale followed new leads across occupied Germany. In one encounter, a captured SD officer confessed that agents taken near the Rhine were transferred east under discretion of Berlin. But Berlin was already in ruins, and the archives of the Reich Security Main Office, RSHA, had been looted or destroyed in the city's final defense. The statement, uncorroborated, left only speculation. Had the OSS men been used as bargaining chips in some last-ditch negotiation? Or had they simply been executed and buried under false identities? Back in the United States, their families received brief telegrams of condolence. Your son is missing in action following special duty in Germany. No details. No closure. For most, it was as though the men had been erased from existence. Even within the OSS, some began to question whether the mission had ever been fully documented, or if parts of it had been deliberately suppressed to conceal an intelligence failure. Hale's own field diary closes this chapter on a somber note. Evidence places them alive beyond the Rhine, near Dattenberg. No proof of capture or death. Too clean. Too empty. Someone removed them, or wanted us to believe they were gone. As post-war Europe divided and the OSS transitioned into the newly formed CIA, the Silent Fox file was boxed away in the agency's deep archives. Years later, when Hale was asked if he believed the men had survived, he paused before answering, "No one survives when both sides need you to disappear." Still, the forest near Dattenberg kept its quiet secrets. To this day, hikers occasionally find rusted fragments, an American cartridge, a torn strap, a broken radio part, half buried under moss. Artifacts of a vanished mission, whispering across time of 8 men who crossed a river at night and never came back. In 1946, as war crimes tribunals opened in Nuremberg and the ashes of the Reich were sifted for truth, a small file labeled OSS Case #37C, Operation Silent Fox, quietly resurfaced in the archives of the U.S. War Department. The war was over, but the mystery remained. It was Lieutenant Robert Hale, now reassigned to post-war intelligence duties in Frankfurt, who reopened the investigation. What he found suggested that the team's disappearance was no mere battlefield accident, but the result of a calculated betrayal buried deep within the intelligence war that raged behind the front lines. The lead came from an unlikely source, a stack of German field records recovered from a bunker near Wiesbaden. Among them was a set of interrogation summaries belonging to the Sicherheitsdienst, SD, Germany's counterintelligence branch. One document bore a cryptic heading, Captured Allied Commandos, Special Case Futschlaut. The term Futschlaut, translated loosely to Fox Sound, or Echo of the Fox, an unsettling echo of Operation Silent Fox. Dated March 9, 1945, it described 8 unidentified enemy operatives captured while attempting infiltration near Linz. All were reported as held under RSHA authority, Berlin. But the trail ended there. No follow-up, no prisoner transfers, no executions. As though they had vanished into administrative smoke. Digging deeper, Hale uncovered the name that had haunted him since the mission's failure. Klaus Ritter, the supposed German engineer who had provided the crossing coordinates. Cross-referencing OSS and British SOE records revealed that Ritter had once been listed as a double asset under both organizations. He had supplied detailed intelligence on bridge fortifications, minefield gaps, and Wehrmacht troop positions. Yet the British files carried an alarming annotation in red, reliability uncertain, suspected RSHA infiltration, 1944. Hale realized that Ritter had been under suspicion even before the operation launched. Somehow, that warning had never reached the OSS European desk in time. Interrogations of captured SD personnel yielded fragments of confirmation. One officer admitted that Ritter had been turned by the SD's AMT-6, working undercover as a neutral engineer in Cologne. His orders were to feed false intelligence to Allied networks to lure special units into controlled capture zones. It was psychological warfare, the officer explained, to show that your secret armies could be hunted, too. For Hale, the implication was devastating. Operation Silent Fox had been bait, sent across the Rhine based on falsified coordinates, straight into the SD's net. The captured documents hinted at something even darker. Among them was an unsigned RSHA directive labeled Action Führerfeder, Operation Fire Quill. Its content was heavily damaged, but a surviving line read, prisoners to be transferred east for evaluation by AMT-6 specialists. High priority, foreign technical service. The timing coincided exactly with the last known reports of the captured operatives near Linz. Hale suspected that evaluation meant interrogation, perhaps forced intelligence debriefing, or exploitation for propaganda. But the Soviet advance and Germany's collapse in April 1945 had likely obliterated any record of what happened next. In a memo to OSS Director William Donovan, Hale summarized his findings: mission compromised at inception. Infiltration map altered by double agent Ritter, working under SD supervision. Capture probable, execution unconfirmed. Recommend classification as compromised operation with restricted disclosure to next of kin. Donovan's reply was terse. Understood. Contain details. No public release. Officially, the case was closed. But Hale continued to pursue the unanswered question: why was Operation Silent Fox targeted at all? What could 8 men behind the Rhine have possessed that warranted such elaborate deception? Years later, fragments of British correspondence provided a potential clue. Before the mission, OSS Europe had collaborated with British SOE Section X, sharing intelligence on German signal encryption sites. The Silent Fox team had reportedly carried partial schematics of captured Enigma variants, machines seized during raids in France and Belgium. If the SD learned this, the mission's true objective may not have been sabotage, but the delivery of that technology to Allied cryptographers. Losing it to German counterintelligence would have been catastrophic, an embarrassment both Washington and London would prefer to keep buried. In the margins of his private field journal, Hale scrawled, "If they carried cipher components, it explains everything. They weren't just hunted, they were retrieved." Despite mounting evidence, the truth never reached the public. In 1947, the OSS was dissolved and replaced by the Central Intelligence Agency. Dozens of wartime files were sealed under new security statutes, including all materials relating to Operation Silent Fox. The disappearance of the team was quietly rewritten in official summaries as a failed infiltration attempt under heavy fire. The details of the suspected double agent and the fire quill directive vanished with the transition. But Hale could not let it go. In an interview decades later, he confessed, "We lost good men because someone inside our own system trusted the wrong hand. That was our failure. Not the river, not the war, but us." For historians who later unearthed fragments of the case through declassified OSS microfilm, the story reflected the shadowy underside of wartime intelligence, a struggle not only between nations, but within the very networks sworn to outwit the enemy. Betrayal was an occupational hazard. The line between loyalty and survival was razor thin. As Hale's investigation concluded, one haunting image remained fixed in his mind: the last confirmed sighting of 8 men in American gear, standing by a frozen river under a moonless sky, waiting for a signal that would never come. Their courage had not faltered. It had simply been misdirected. And as post-war Germany rebuilt from ashes, the files of Operation Silent Fox were quietly buried in the vaults of Langley, sealed under a clause marked, "For reasons of national security." But history, as it often does, refuses to stay silent. Whispers of a double agent, a vanished team, and a coded operation called Fire Quill would resurface again years later, proof that the ghosts of the Rhine were not yet done speaking. The war ended, but the silence surrounding Operation Silent Fox only deepened. Europe rebuilt, and the world turned its gaze toward new frontiers, the Iron Curtain, atomic secrets, and the uneasy dawn of the Cold War. Yet within the sealed archives of the newly formed CIA, one file from the OSS era remained classified far longer than most. It bore a single line: Subject, OSS Team, Rhine Crossing, March 1945, missing. Status, unresolved. The fate of the 8 men who vanished while crossing the Rhine was never officially confirmed. But over the decades that followed, fragments continued to surface, like faint echoes from a river that refused to yield its dead. In 1951, during joint Allied document recovery operations in the Soviet zone, British intelligence stumbled upon a partial RSHA logbook. Among the entries was a reference to foreign commandos transferred under Operation Feuerfetter. The destination listed, Sachsenhausen Facility, March 12, 1945. Sachsenhausen was a concentration camp north of Berlin, used by the SD for special interrogations. The file ended abruptly with the words, "Evaluation completed, March 16." There were no subsequent records, no prisoner manifests, no names. For Lieutenant Hale, now retired but still corresponding with colleagues in London, it was confirmation of his darkest suspicion, that the OSS men had been moved east, interrogated, and likely executed as the Reich collapsed around them. Yet another thread emerged years later from an unexpected corner. In 1964, a German archivist named Dieter Keller uncovered a cache of SD microfilm in an abandoned police building near Leipzig. Among the damaged reels was a brief note signed by SS Sturmbannführer Karl Nowak, dated March 15, 1945, 8 Anglo-American prisoners transferred for evaluation of technical material. Disposition to follow. Keller shared the find with the West German Intelligence Service, the BND, which quietly relayed it to the CIA. The response came back within days: do not pursue. Classified historical. The file disappeared once more into official silence. Over time, the war's veterans grew old, and their stories faded into history. But the mystery of Silent Fox continued to intrigue military historians, especially as declassified OSS material in the 1980s hinted at a connection to the Allied cryptography war. According to one redacted memorandum, the team had been transporting partial cipher components recovered from destroyed German communication posts in France, possibly to be tested near the Rhine front before the final Allied push. If that were true, their disappearance may have been linked to something far larger than a failed infiltration, a secret race to secure intelligence before the collapse of Nazi Germany. Some scholars theorized that the SD captured both the men and their equipment, using them briefly to bargain with approaching Soviet forces as the Reich disintegrated. Others believed that the Americans themselves buried the truth to conceal the operational failure and prevent diplomatic embarrassment during early U.S. Soviet intelligence cooperation. But none of these theories could answer the one enduring question: what exactly happened on the night the team crossed the Rhine? In 1999, declassified CIA files shed a dim light on the final chapter. A single page labeled Post-War Debrief, Project 47 Delta, contained a transcription of a 1946 interview with a captured SD officer. The officer admitted that an OSS unit was held at a facility near Oranienburg, questioned regarding Allied code systems. He continued, orders were given to liquidate prisoners on or about March 17 due to imminent Allied approach. The rest of the transcript was blacked out. No names, no confirmation, but the timing, again, aligned perfectly. For historians, the evidence was enough to draw a grim conclusion. The men of Operation Silent Fox likely survived the Rhine crossing, were captured by the SD within days, interrogated in Berlin's dying weeks, and executed before liberation. Yet no graves have ever been found. No remains identified. The river and the war kept their secrets well. Decades later, when the Rhine is calm and the ruins of Remagen's bridge towers stand silent against the current, one might imagine what they saw: the dark waters beneath them, the cold wind cutting across the banks, the faint rumble of artillery in the distance. They crossed not for glory, but for duty, armed with little more than courage and silence. And somewhere between two worlds, between the end of one war and the dawn of another, they vanished. Robert Hale never stopped searching. Before his death in 1972, he wrote a final note in his journal: 8 men crossed the Rhine under the code name Silent Fox. I've read every file, every rumor, every ghost of a record. But I think they knew. I think, at the end, they understood what they'd walked into, and went anyway. Perhaps that was the true meaning of their mission: not sabotage or intelligence, but the quiet heroism of those who operated in the shadows, unacknowledged and unrewarded, to shorten a war that had already cost too much. Today, a small memorial plaque in an OSS museum in Washington bears their names, etched without dates of death. Beneath it, a simple inscription reads, "For those who crossed the river and never returned." The Rhine still flows, indifferent and eternal, past the places where their story began and ended. And though the records remain incomplete, the echo of Operation Silent Fox lingers, part truth, part legend, a reminder that even in victory, some mysteries of war never find their way home.